Merry Christmas, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed the first day of Christmas, and I hope you're enjoying the second day of Christmas so far. This morning, I was again reminded of how society ends Christmas today. I got into my car this morning to come to church, and when I started up, I did not hear Christmas music, but instead I heard, I want to rock and roll all night, which was not the Christmas station that I had on previously. And I always wonder why we want Christmas to come so much, but we're so quick to move on from it. Thankfully, we're aware that Christmas is just starting. So I hope if you haven't had your Christmas gatherings yet, that when they do come, it will be a wonderful celebration of God with us. I didn't really want to make this a tirade on the misunderstanding of the season. So we will move on. Maybe when you heard this Colossians text, you thought to yourself, this isn't very Christmassy. At first glance, it doesn't seem very much like a passage that we would associate with Christmas. The text doesn't mention Mary. The text doesn't mention angels or magi. This isn't an Old Testament prophecy about the birth of Christ. It appears to not be very Christmassy. Yet I think it very much is a Christmas passage. And it made me think of a Christmas from my childhood. There was a Christmas many years ago. I'm going to guess I was about 8, give or take some time. And I received a gift that I didn't really ask for. I got a telescope for Christmas. It was neither a very good nor powerful telescope, but it did the trick for an about 8-year-old. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I thought it was neat, and I did use it. My dad and I would go outside at night and look into the sky every so often. And I probably enjoyed hanging out with my dad more than looking at the stars. Yet, as a gift, I thought about that I received many, many years ago. I've recently just come to understand that that gift did something that I wasn't expecting or even realized until now. It partially helped me to overcome something, a fear of the dark. As a child, I was afraid of the dark. That very low-powered telescope helped change my attitude about nighttime. Instead of not wanting to be outside alone at night, it slowly changed my perception. My dad often would go outside with me when I'd use it, but there would be times that I started going out alone. The night had something to offer. That gift had a completely unexpected side effect. Suddenly, I wasn't as afraid of the dark as I used to be. That gift did more than I had expected it to. So in a similar fashion, this text from Colossians is a Christmas text, not in the sense of the actual birth of the Messiah, but in terms of the long-range effect of the gift God gave the world. It's a gift that keeps on giving 2,000 years later. It's also a gift that requires something of us. If I had never used that telescope and it just sat in the closet, it wouldn't have done very much. I hope I would have still gotten over my fear of the dark without it, but it aided in that task. Our text from Colossians is one that talks about the human results of the coming of Jesus. The gift of Jesus was somewhat unexpected. There were many who were anticipating that if the Messiah did come, it would be an earthly ruler, one who would drive out the Romans who were inhabiting the land. They thought that is what they wanted. They thought that's how God would act. And why wouldn't they think that God would come in that way? someone who will lead a battle for land for a specific group of people. I think it's natural that they think God would come in that way, because not too long ago, we were going through the book of Numbers. And we saw repeatedly that getting to the promised land involved difficult things that created a little discomfort for many of us with battles over nations. And many of us expressed that difficulty of connecting our experience with God with this account of God. Jesus is an unexpected gift. As God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience. Bear with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgive each other, just as the Lord has forgiven you. So you also must forgive. That's why we celebrate the long-lasting nature of God's gift of the Christ to us. It's a gift of forgiveness, of compassion, of kindness, of humility, of meekness and patience. It's the gift of God with us. And we are asked to put on, to clothe these characteristics so that we live out these qualities, not just merely have them in the closet next to an old telescope, but that we clothe ourselves with them, that they become actions that define how we live as Christ lived. Compassion, kindness, humility, greatness, patience, descriptions of God's character and the characteristics that are to describe those who have been transformed by the gift of God with us. Virtues that describe someone who has received the gift from God, which should hopefully have a long-term effect. This passage tells us these virtues exist, that love prevails because the Lord has forgiven. That we have experienced the love of God seen in forgiveness because God is these characteristics: compassionate, kind, humble, gentle, patient, and forgiving. The experience of God's gift of Christ, which we celebrate. One of my pet peeves is when Christians expect non-Christians to act like Christians, which has got everything backwards. God does not love us and forgive us because we've repented. We repent because God has given us this gift of love and forgives us. I think of when I used to babysit my nephews and nieces when they were quite young. I was a teenager when I became an uncle, and I would have to babysit a couple of times a week after school. If I based then whether or not I loved them on their actions, it would be difficult to love them. Teenage Uncle Craig wasn't always that patient. And on occasion, I'll admit that I became frustrated. I didn't and don't love them because of what they do. I simply loved them. They're much easier as 20-somethings to not get frustrated with, thank goodness. Jesus wasn't born into a perfect world where everything was fine and dandy. Jesus didn't come into the world because there was peace. Jesus didn't come because everyone was fully and completely committed to God. God was sent because the world was broken. Christ came into a corrupt world. Jesus came because God first loved us. And there became a little shift as God's chosen ones. Who are the chosen ones? Everyone who wants to receive this gift from God. Romans 5:8, Paul says, God proves love for us that while we still were sinners, Christ died for us. The gift of God with us has unexpected results. Results in living out what we have experienced. Again, from Romans 5:8, God proves love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God does not love us and forgive us because we are perfect, but rather because we aren't. Because we need to be shown the way. We need to be given forgiveness and kindness and patience and compassion and all the other virtues mentioned in this passage. I still have the book of Numbers in my mind, and I think, how often were God's instructions ignored, questioned, dismissed? In God's saving act, God's people kept forgetting and messing up. After that time, God continued to call prophets over and over again to tell the way that God is leading them, and people kept on ignoring. This was often a reaction to God then, and it's often a reaction to God now. Yet God is still the one who offers forgiveness. That is why we celebrate Christmas, isn't it? We don't do it for lots of gifts, although it is nice to give and to receive gifts. We don't celebrate because there is lots of food or fellowship with friends and family, although it's wonderful to celebrate with family and friends over a luxurious big meal. We celebrate Christmas as a recognition of God's love to a people who did not ask to be forgiven, but were offered forgiveness anyway. That's why Christmas is so wonderful. God knew that we needed the Christ to come and to show us the way, to show us how our priorities are to be similar to the way that Christ lived. To love, to offer forgiveness, to be compassionate, to be humble, to love, to offer forgiveness. For that is what we have received. That is what we are asked to put on and give to others. I'd like to date myself a little bit and read something that Paul Harvey read for many years on his show around Christmas. My dad loved Paul Harvey and would listen whenever he could. It's titled "The Man and His Birds." I'm going to jump in the middle of it. The author is unknown, but according to Paul Harvey, the story was originally published by United Press International. He was startled by a thudding sound, then another, and then another. At first, he thought someone must be throwing snowballs against the living room window. But when he went to the door to investigate, he found a flock of birds huddled outside miserably in the snow. They had been caught in the storm, and in a desperate search for shelter, they had tried to fly through his large landscape window. That is what had been making the sound. Well, he couldn't let the poor creatures just lie there and freeze, so he remembered the barn that would provide a warm shelter. All he would have to do is direct the birds into the shelter. Quickly, he put on a coat and galoshes and trampled through the deepening snow to the barn. He opened the doors wide and turned on a light so the birds would know the way in, but the birds did not come in. So he figured that food would entice them, hurried back to the house and fetched some breadcrumbs, sprinkled them on the snow, making a trail to the yellow lighted wide open doorway of the stable. But to his dismay, the birds ignored the breadcrumbs. The birds continued to flap around helplessly in the snow. He tried catching them, but could not. He tried shooing them into the barn by walking around and waving his arms. Instead, they scattered in every direction except into the warm barn. That's when he realized they were afraid of him. To them, he reasoned, I am a strange and terrifying creature. If only I could think of some way to let them know they can trust me, that I am not trying to hurt them, but to help them. But how? Any move he made tended to frighten them and confuse them. They just would not follow. They would not be led or shooed because they feared him. He thought to himself, if only I could be a bird and mingle with them and speak their language, then I could tell them not to be afraid. Then I could show them the way to the safe, warm barn. But I would have to be one of them so they could see and hear and understand. This is the Christmas season. We are to remember the gift that we have received from God and to use it to clothe ourselves in gentleness, compassion, kindness, humility, patience, and forgiveness, based in love, which speaks the wonders to the gift we have received from God. Amen.